My name is Julia Thompson and I am 28 years old. My brother accused me of faking my disability. Get up, he pushed me. But my doctor spoke 5 words. Stop everything. I sued him for $120,000. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I never thought a family gathering could feel like a battlefield. But that summer day, my entire world tilted sideways. Literally, I had been living with a spinal injury for nearly 2 years. My body had its limits, but my mind had been prepared for the usual whispers, the questioning glances, the subtle disbelief. I wasn't ready for Luke, my older brother, to make me the center of a public spectacle. It started as soon as I rolled onto my aunt's sun-baked patio in my wheelchair. The smell of charcoal and sizzling burgers filled the air. Laughter and country music blended into a surreal, almost cruel symphony. 45 family members milled around, some filming, some whispering, and some staring with judgment etched into their faces. I felt my palms scrape against the concrete, tiny bits of gravel embedding in my skin as my wheelchair tipped slightly to the side. My right leg screamed at me with sharp, familiar pain. Pain I had learned to live with, but which no one seemed to understand. And then Luke appeared, beer in hand, flushed with righteous anger, chest heaving as though this confrontation had been scripted for him. Get up, Julia. Quit pretending for everyone to see. He bellowed. The crowd laughed, some cheering, others holding up phones to record. My stomach churned. I had faced skepticism, but never outright cruelty like this. I tried to push myself upright. My arms trembled, blood prickling through small scrapes on my hands. The rough concrete had left little fragments lodged in my skin, stinging as I moved. Look at her, Luke shouted, turning toward the family as though presenting evidence in a courtroom. She's been using that chair for 1.5 years, taking Mom for all she's worth, lying about her disability. Mom's voice shook from somewhere near the picnic table. I was there, she said softly, almost apologetically, like a timid mediator rather than a mother protecting her child. Luke didn't care. You found her at the bottom of the stairs, remember? The family saw it. Agreement, consideration. That makes sense, doesn't it? The murmur spread through the crowd like wildfire. Cousin Caleb, 23, still living at home and working at Best Buy, piped up. I saw her walking last month at Jewel Oscar. Heads nodded. Gasps rippled through the circle. It was as if every half-hearted claim of normally was ammunition against me. I opened my mouth to speak, my voice weaker than I intended. I've been in outpatient therapy. I've been trying. Shut up, Luke interrupted, slamming the side of my wheelchair like a hammer against a bell. The aluminum frame rang in the hot July air. You've been collecting disability checks, living in Mom's basement, playing video games, ordering food. You've done nothing while the rest of us work. I wanted to scream, to make them understand, but the pain in my leg pinned me in place. My Uncle Michael, always the self-proclaimed arbiter of personal responsibility, had his phone raised, filming every humiliating second, and Rachel folded her arms, lips pursed. A silent witness to my public disgrace, my grandma sat back in her lawn chair, fanning herself with a paper plate, indifferent, detached, as if my suffering were a television drama she couldn't turn off. Stand up, Luke commanded again, his voice rising over the music, over the laughter, over my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Or I'll call the police for fraud. Disability fraud. Whatever applies. I shook my head. I couldn't. Every nerve in my leg was firing, misfiring pain. Every movement felt like knives. I tried to explain, my voice a whisper. It's not. But Luke shoved harder. My wallet flew open across my chest. Disability card displayed as proof. My medical bills. The van, the special braces, everything I relied on turned into evidence of my supposed deceit. Then the impossible happened. A calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Julia, let me handle this. Everyone turned. A man in his mid-50s, dressed in khakis and a navy polo, wire-rimmed glasses, holding a Diet Coke, stepped forward. Dr. Samuel Hayes, my orthopedic surgeon, had arrived exactly as I had requested. His presence changed everything. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He merely said, "You thought wrong. She is not lying. You do not understand what she has endured." The air shifted. The laughter died. Luke froze. Caught mid-sentence, Dr. Hayes calmly pulled out his phone, showing x-rays of my lumbar spine, metal rods, screws, the remnants of surgery that had saved my legs from paralysis. He explained clinically the nerve damage, the chronic pain, the impossibility of walking long distances. Every detail was precise, every word slicing through the assumptions and ignorance like a scalpel. The family went silent. The crowd's laughter, the chanting, the jeers all evaporated. For the first time, they had to confront reality that I had not been faking, that my suffering was real, that the pain I lived with every day was documented, treated, bored, measured, and undeniable. And in that moment, with the truth laid bare, I realized something profound. The battle wasn't just about my wheelchair. It was about validation, about recognition, about surviving a family who had refused to see me as I was. I looked at Luke, the man who had been my brother, my protector for 15 years, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered me at my wedding. He was now the person who tried to destroy me in front of everyone I loved. And I knew even then that this confrontation would be only the beginning of an emotional journey none of us could have anticipated. After Dr. Hayes' intervention, a heavy silence settled over the patio. My hands were still trembling, the scraped palms throbbing, but my chest felt lighter. For the first time that afternoon, I could breathe without the weight of ridicule pressing down on me. Luke, however, looked like a man who had just realized he had miscalculated a storm. You have proof." His voice was a whisper now, stripped of the arrogance he had flaunted minutes ago. His eyes darted between the x-rays on Dr. Hayes' phone and my own guarded gaze. "Yes," Dr. Hayes said simply, "she's been through surgery. Her rehabilitation is ongoing. Anyone who claims she is faking has no understanding of the condition she lives with every day." The family shifted uneasily, and Rachel muttered under her breath, "Well, I suppose we didn't know all the details." My Uncle Michael lowered his phone reluctantly, the shame in his eyes faint, but real. Luke, however, was not done. His voice rose again, but this time tinged with desperation rather than anger. "Then why do you still sit in that chair? You could walk sometimes, couldn't you?" I wanted to scream at him. "Do you see me at home? Do you see me struggling to get out of bed? The mornings I can't even lift my legs. Do you see the nights I cry because of the pain?" But instead, I said quietly, "I live with my limits. I survive because I have no other choice, and it doesn't give anyone the right to humiliate me." And Rachel's eyes softened. Mom's hand hovered near my shoulder, unsure whether to touch me or retreat. Dr. Hayes nodded slightly, as if to say, "Good, she's standing her ground." Figuratively, at least. Luke's face turned red, then pale. His voice dropped to a murmur, more to himself than anyone else. I didn't know. It was too late for apologies. The crowd that had been jeering, recording, laughing, was now looking at him with a mix of pity and judgment. The laughter had vanished, replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that perhaps the real failure was not me, but the way they had all ignored my reality for years. I tried to process it, even as my legs screamed in protest, my arms shaking from the strain. This wasn't just a physical struggle. It was a war of acknowledgement, and in that moment, I realized my family had underestimated the strength it took for me to survive every single day. But Luke wasn't finished. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, eyes wild. "This isn't over, Julia. You think you're untouchable now, but everyone's going to see the truth eventually. You can't hide behind a doctor forever." I stared at him, finally, meeting his gaze without fear. "No, but I can stand in front of the truth. Unlike you, I don't need to push someone to prove my point." Dr. Hayes stepped between us, placing a calming hand on my wheelchair. "That's enough. Julia has endured enough for one day. Let her be." Luke's fist clenched at his sides, but he retreated a step. The fire in his eyes was still there, simmering. But for the moment, he had no audience, no momentum. I exhaled slowly. My back HAD, my arms screamed from the effort, but there was a strange quiet triumph in knowing I had survived. Not just the physical act of being pushed, not just the humiliation, but the weight of disbelief and mockery that had plagued me. For months, Mom finally approached, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. "I should have believed you," she whispered almost to herself. "I should have stood up for you. It's not too late," I said softly. "I just needed someone to see me, not pity me, not doubt me, just see me." Her eyes filled with tears, and I realized that validation wasn't something that came from doctors, lawyers, or x-rays. It came from the acknowledgement of people who truly mattered, the ones who could witness your struggle without needing to dominate it or dismiss it. Luke stood in the background, silent now. His anger dissipated into confusion, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, the first glimmer of understanding. But I knew this was only the beginning. Family dynamics weren't resolved in one confrontation. They unfolded like shadows at dusk, subtle, slow, and often painful. And I, Julia Thompson, was finally ready to face them on my terms. Not theirs. The following weeks were a whirlwind of phone calls, lawyer meetings, and careful documentation. Luke's push had been the spark, but the fire had grown into something bigger, a legal confrontation that none of us had expected. I had never imagined suing my own brother, but after that day, it was clear that some boundaries could not be ignored. I sat in my lawyer's office reviewing the documents for what felt like the 100th time. The claim was straightforward: $120,000 in damages for assault, humiliation, and emotional distress. The sum wasn't about money. It was about acknowledgement, accountability, and proving that I wasn't someone to be trifled with. "You're certain about this?" my lawyer, Ms. Patel, asked, her tone cautious. Lawsuits against family members can get complicated. Emotions run high. Evidence is key, I'm sure, I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I have witnesses, I have medical proof, and I have the recordings from that day. This isn't about revenge, it's about respect. He needs to understand the consequences of his actions." She nodded. Impressed, "Then we proceed. This will send a message, not just to him, but to anyone who thinks they can diminish you because of your disability." The news spread slowly among our extended family. At gatherings, I noticed the subtle shifts. Relatives avoiding direct eye contact with Luke, hesitant murmurs behind hands, and the occasional nod from those who had quietly supported me all along. Mom stayed by my side, occasionally squeezing my hand when our eyes met, silently offering solidarity. But Luke remained unyielding. At the first mediation, he walked in with a posture of defiance, a forced confidence masking the uncertainty I could see in his eyes. "This is ridiculous," he said as soon as he faced me across the table. "We're family. Why are you doing this?" I leaned slightly forward, not out of threat, but to assert presence. "Because family doesn't mean you get to hurt me and pretend it didn't happen. You don't get to erase my reality to suit your narrative," he scoffed. But the sound lacked conviction. The mediator, an older man with a calm voice, asked both of us to lay out the facts. One by one, I presented evidence: the x-rays, the doctor's statement, photographs of bruises, and videos captured by my cousin at the gathering. Each piece landed like bricks, solid and undeniable. Luke's protests grew weaker as the session went on. By the end, he was silent, slouched in the chair, as if the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. Outside the mediation room, Mom hugged me tightly. "I didn't know how badly he could hurt you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I should have stood up sooner." "You can't rewrite the past," I said. My own emotions raw but controlled. But we can influence the future. And I'm not going to let him dictate it. The lawsuit eventually concluded with a settlement in my favor. $120,000. Luke paid every penny. And although money can never erase the humiliation, it provided a tangible recognition of the harm he had caused. More importantly, it established a boundary he could no longer ignore. Family gatherings after the settlement were tense, but different. People approached me with respect, acknowledging the strength that had taken to stand up for myself. Luke kept his distance, subdued and silent, a shadow of the brash man who had once shoved me to the ground. I realized something crucial. Standing up for yourself isn't just about confrontation. It's about reclaiming power, asserting dignity, and demanding recognition of your truth. And once that happens, even those who doubted you can no longer act as if your struggle is invisible. As I rolled through the living room that evening, my chest felt lighter than it had in years. The sunlight streaming through the window illuminated the scratches on my arms and legs, the marks of survival. But more than that, it highlighted a resilience that no shove, no laughter, and no disbelief could ever take away. I was Julia Thompson, 28 years old, a woman who had faced betrayal, doubt, and physical harm, and had emerged not broken, but stronger. And while the road ahead with my family would never be perfect, I now knew that my voice, my existence, and my dignity were non-negotiable. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. Months had passed since the settlement, and while the legal battle was over, the tension within the family hadn't completely dissipated. Holiday gatherings, which used to feel like a warm tradition, had become minefields of subtle glances, hushed conversations, and unspoken resentments. I arrived at the latest family dinner, rolling my chair into the familiar dining room, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in my stomach. Mom greeted me with a smile, her eyes reflecting both pride and worry. "Julia, I'm so glad you came," she said softly, adjusting the scarf around her neck. "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice light. I wasn't about to let the environment intimidate me. Not anymore. Luke was already there, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, his face a mask of neutrality. His silence felt louder than any words he could have said. I could feel him watching me, measuring my every move, calculating, probably, hoping I would show some sign of weakness. I sat down and tried to engage with other relatives, laughing politely at stories about work, vacations, and minor mishaps. But the elephant in the room, the incident that had changed the family dynamic, was impossible to ignore. Every sentence, every smile, felt carefully calculated. As if we were all performing in a fragile truce, Luke finally broke the silence, his voice low and controlled. "So everything's settled now, right? The money thing?" I met his gaze directly. "Yes, it's settled. But it wasn't just about money, Luke. It was about respect, something I hope you understand now." He looked away, tension tightening his jaw. "I get it," he muttered. But there was no conviction in his tone. Mom intervened gently. "Let's not rehash everything tonight. Julia, you've handled this with grace. That's what matters." I nodded, grateful for her intervention, but also aware that Luke's resentment was still simmering beneath the surface. I didn't expect him to apologize or admit fault openly. Some wounds take time, and some people take longer to accept accountability. The night progressed with a careful rhythm, everyone navigating the invisible lines drawn by past conflicts. I found solace in small moments, my younger cousins laughing over board games, the smell of Mom's cooking filling the room, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had taken control of my own narrative. At one point, Luke attempted another comment, this time disguised as a joke. "So, Julia, planning to sue anyone else anytime soon?" I smiled, not out of amusement, but as a shield. "No, Luke. I'm focusing on the people who actually matter in my life," I replied evenly. The words were polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. He huffed, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps realizing that I wasn't going to play into his attempts at provocation, he retreated to the corner of the room, quietly sipping his drink, defeated not by legal action, but by the unshakable confidence I now carried. By the end of the evening, I understood that family dynamics are never simple. Some relationships heal slowly, some never fully mend, and some, like mine with Luke, are redefined entirely by boundaries and respect. As I wheeled myself toward the front door, Mom followed, giving me a reassuring squeeze. You've changed everything, Julia. Not just for yourself, but for all of us. You've shown us what strength really looks like. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It's not about proving anything to anyone anymore. It's about living my truth. That's what matters outside. The night air was crisp, and the stars were scattered across the sky like fragments of hope. I paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze against my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my story. Not just surviving, but thriving. Luke's shadow would linger for a while, but it no longer had the power to define me. I was Julia Thompson, 28 years old, resilient and broken, and finally free to live on my own terms. Weeks later, I found myself in a quieter chapter of my life. The intensity of the lawsuit and the public attention had subsided, leaving me with space to focus on myself and on rebuilding the fractured pieces of my relationships on my own terms. I spent mornings at the rehabilitation center, now volunteering, in the same wing where I had once undergone grueling therapy, watching patients struggle, succeed, and sometimes falter reminded me of how far I had come and how resilience often begins in silence. One afternoon, as I helped a young woman adjust her walker, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mom. Julia, Luke wants to meet just the two of you. He says he wants to explain things. Please consider it. My heart skipped. Part of me wanted to ignore it to preserve the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. Another part, the part that believed people could learn from their mistakes, stirred with curiosity. After a long pause, I typed back, fine, tomorrow, 10 o'clock a.m. at the cafe near the clinic. The next morning, I wheeled into the small cafe, sunlight streaming across the polished wooden tables. Luke was already there, sitting in a corner, his posture rigid, hands clasped together. He looked older, thinner, a little fragile, the consequences of his choices etched across his face. I approached slowly, wary but determined. Hi, Luke, I said, my voice calm. He rose slightly, a hesitant smile on his lips. Julia, thanks for meeting me, he said. There was a tremor in his voice that betrayed both fear and regret. We sat, the silence between us heavy, unnecessary. Finally, he spoke. I've spent months thinking about everything. That day, I acted out of ignorance and pride. I didn't try to understand, and I hurt you. I can't undo that. But I want you to know I've been trying to change. I watched him closely, noticing the subtle shift in his tone, the sincerity beneath the awkwardness. Change takes time, Luke. It's not just about saying sorry, I replied. It's about showing it. Actions matter more than words now. He nodded, swelling hard. I've been volunteering at a rehab facility nearby, helping patients with mobility challenges, learning about spinal injuries, learning patience, humility, empathy. I want to be better, Julia, not just for me, but because of you. The words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to feel anger, but the raw honesty in his voice stirred something different, a cautious hope. You've made steps, I admitted, but you don't get to erase the past, the humiliation, the betrayal, that's still there. I won't forget it, and I can't just forgive blindly. That's not fairness. He looked down, shame and determination mingling in his expression. I know, I don't expect that from you. I just want you to see that I'm trying, that I understand finally what you went through. I exhaled slowly, then prove it, actions over time. That's the only thing that matters now. We spent the next hour talking, not about lawsuits or money or blame, but about the work he was doing, the people he was helping, and the lessons he had learned. Slowly, carefully, the tension between us began to ease. It was not forgiveness yet, not fully, but it was acknowledgement, and that was the first step towards something resembling reconciliation. When we parted, I felt a cautious optimism. Luke still had much to prove, but for the first time, I could see the possibility of a future where our relationship wasn't defined by that one violent, humiliating moment outside. The city hummed with life. I wheeled myself down the sidewalk, sunlight warming my face, and thought about the journey ahead. Strength wasn't just surviving. It was facing the people who had wronged you, setting boundaries, and recognizing your own worth. For the first time in years, I felt the fragile stirrings of peace, my body still itchy. My progress was still painstaking, but my spirit was resolute. I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by how I responded, how I persisted, and how I chose to live my life moving forward. And in that moment, I knew one thing with certainty. I was ready to reclaim my story entirely, without apology or compromise. In the weeks that followed, I decided to take my experience beyond the confines of personal healing. I began speaking at rehabilitation centers, sharing my journey, not to dwell on the cruelty I had faced, but to illuminate the resilience that emerges when people refuse to be defined by their limitations or the malice of others. At first, it was terrifying. My voice shook during the first few talks. My hands fidgeted as I tried to keep the wheelchair steady. And every time someone asked about my brother, I felt the familiar sting of old wounds. But with each story I told, each nod of understanding from the audience, I felt my confidence grow. I was no longer a victim. I was a voice, and my story had weight. Luke reached out periodically, checking in. At first, I ignored some of his messages. Then when I noticed genuine change in his actions, his volunteering, his patience with people with disabilities, I began to respond. Our conversations were careful, measured, and occasionally tense, but slowly, he began to demonstrate the sincerity he claimed, not just in words, but in deeds. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on accessibility and advocacy. The organizers had learned of my story through local media coverage and wanted me to inspire a wider audience. I felt a flicker of nervous excitement as I read the email. Standing before hundreds of people, sharing my most vulnerable moments seemed daunting. But I realized I no longer feared judgment. I had faced far worse than nerves, indifference, ridicule, betrayal, and survived. The day of the conference arrived. I wheeled onto the stage, my heart racing. But the crowd's encouraging smiles steadied me. I began to speak, recounting my story. The accident, the humiliation, the legal battles, the moments of despair. I shared the strength I discovered within myself, the patience I cultivated, and the steps I took toward reclaiming my life. As I spoke, I glanced at the front row and saw Luke sitting quietly, hands folded, listening intently. His expression was unreadable, but I could sense the weight of acknowledgement. He had witnessed my growth, and perhaps in some small way, it inspired him to keep striving for better. After my talk, dozens of people approached me, people with disabilities, family members, advocates, sharing their own struggles, their gratitude, and their desire to push forward. The stories I had once thought too painful to share became a bridge, connecting me to others who understood the depth of resilience and the importance of self-advocacy. That night, back in my apartment, I reflected on the journey. I had lost trust, endured humiliation, and been betrayed by someone I once called family. Yet, through it all, I had gained perspective, empathy, and a voice that could make a difference. I realized that while I could not erase the past, I could use it as a foundation to shape a future defined by purpose rather than pain. Luke sent me a message. "I'm proud of you, Julia. Truly, keep inspiring. Keep fighting." I smiled, the words warming me, but not defining me. I replied simply, I'm doing it for all of us. Stay honest with yourself, Luke. That's the real work. As I set my phone down, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. Life had tested me in unimaginable ways, but it had also revealed an inner strength I hadn't known existed. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving, leading, and reclaiming the narrative that had once been stolen from me outside. The city lights flickered against the evening sky. I wheeled to the window, watching life move in its relentless rhythm. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped, angry, or defeated. I felt empowered, free because I had faced the worst, risen above it, and discovered that the most profound victories aren't always those we win against others. They're the ones we achieve within ourselves. By now, the aftermath of that brutal family gathering had settled into a tense quiet in my life, though the echoes of betrayal and humiliation still lingered. Months had passed since the lawsuit, the media coverage, and the public scrutiny. But the emotional weight of what happened hadn't left me. Luke, my brother, had been forced to face the consequences, but I knew that healing, real healing, wasn't about punishment alone. It was early spring when I received an unexpected knock at my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there stood Luke holding a large manila folder. His eyes were nervous. The lines of guilt still etched into his face, but his posture carried the faintest hint of humility. I wanted to show you something, he said softly. Not daring to enter without permission, I stepped aside. Come in. But this doesn't mean forgiveness, I warned. Luke nodded. He placed the folder on the table between us. I've been volunteering at the rehab center, Rush, where Dr. Hayes works. I've been learning, helping people with mobility issues, spinal injuries, chronic pain. I wanted you to see that I've been trying to understand, not just talk about it. I opened the folder carefully. Inside were letters from 12 patients he had worked with, people like me, people who had endured daily struggles with pain, with movement, with life itself. Each letter described his growth, patience, attentiveness, empathy, small acts of kindness that meant the world to someone fighting battles few others could see. I know I can't undo what I did, Luke said, his voice trembling. I can't erase the humiliation, the assault, but I want you to know I'm trying to be someone different, better. I studied him quietly. The man who had shoved me, called me a liar, and led a chant of mockery before 45 people now seemed like someone foreign, someone fragile, uncertain, and painfully sincere. Do you expect me to forgive you? I asked, keeping my voice calm. No, he admitted immediately. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking you to see that I'm trying, that I've learned, that I understand now what I never tried to understand before. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. I felt my own heart shifting, not toward him, not toward forgiveness yet, but toward clarity. I could finally separate the man who caused me pain from the person he was trying to become. We spent hours talking. Luke recounted his work with patients, the lessons he'd learned, the mistakes he'd acknowledged, and the ways he was confronting his own anger and ignorance. I told him about my ongoing physical therapy, the lingering pain, the fight to regain control over my body and my life. We both admitted that nothing could erase the past, but something could grow from it if we allowed it. At the end of the conversation, Luke paused at the door. I know I can't make this right, Julia. I know I can't undo the humiliation, but I want you to know I am different now. I'll carry what I did with me for the rest of my life, better because of you. I studied him for a long moment. You are different, I said finally, but don't make my pain the lesson that redeems you. That's not fair to me. I am not here to teach you empathy. That's on you. He nodded slowly, accepting that truth. I understand. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a disability rights conference in Springfield. The organizers had reached out because of my story, the viral video, the public confrontation, and the eventual lawsuit that sent a message about the rights of disabled individuals. I almost declined. I didn't want to be known. I didn't want to be a symbol. But then I thought about the people I could help, the ones still struggling silently, doubted by their families, accused of faking their pain. I accepted. I told my story. The shove, the humiliation, the evidence, the legal battles, and the slow, painstaking journey toward reclaiming dignity. The room was silent when I finished. Then applause broke out slowly at first, then thunderous. People stood, some with tears in their eyes, many nodding in quiet understanding. Afterwards, a woman in a wheelchair approached me. She was small, fragile, and trembled as she spoke. "My family thinks I'm faking," she said, "Miss Chronic Fatigue. They tell me it's all in my head. How did you get them to believe you?" I took her hand, holding it gently. "Document everything, every appointment, every report, every piece of evidence. Protect yourself because your suffering is real. You matter. Your disability matters, and anyone who refuses to see that doesn't deserve access to your life," she cried, hugging me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing it's possible to fight back." Years after the incident, my mother called. She wanted a family gathering, a small Thanksgiving with just immediate family, including Luke. I thought about it carefully. Did I want to go? Could I? No, I said firmly. Not unless there are genuine apologies. Not generalized. Not hollow, specific acknowledgement. Only then would I even consider it. Otherwise, I cannot pretend the past didn't happen. My mother remained silent, then sighed. She understood finally that reconciliation without accountability was meaningless. Life went on. Luke continued his work with patience. I continued mine, fighting for rights and understanding. And though the scars remained, physical, emotional, and psychological, the story had transformed. Pain had not been wasted. Justice had been sought, and empathy, hard-earned and real, had grown in its place. I had faced my family's cruelty, documented the truth, and reclaimed my own narrative. And in that, I discovered a quiet, unwavering strength that would carry me forward for the rest of my